Okay, good morning, dear participants. Welcome to this next event in today's PAX Protection of Civilians Conference. I want to extend a big welcome both to those participants that are here with us today in The Hague, as well as the many participants joining us remotely online today. This session is called Waiting for Accountability 6 Years After Hawija. My name is Erin. I'm a senior project officer with the PAX Protection of Civilians team, and it is my honor to host this session with these great distinguished speakers next to me. Before diving into practicalities and the session content, I just want to mention a few words on today's theme, which is accountability towards affected civilians during military missions. I don't think I have to stress for the people here today how important this theme is. It's also one that really informs the work that we do at PAX. But it unfortunately is also a theme where a lot of progress still needs to be made and has to be made. I think this is also what we saw this morning for those that were here already in a different session on Hawija. In short, I think today we will have 4 sessions where we will consider different contexts, different case studies, and where we will also see different examples of accountability, and very much also different towards the extent to which accountability has been realized, or the extent to which civilians may actually perceive there is a lack of accountability by security actors. Now, before introducing the speakers, I just want to mention a few housekeeping notes, specifically for those people also online. Please note that all sessions will be recorded, and the recordings will be later made available on our website. We very much encourage active participation throughout this conference. So for the people here with us today, this means that once we get to the Q&A section, feel free to raise your hand, and one of my colleagues will direct you to the microphone over there, so you can ask your question to our speakers. For those participating online, there is the opportunity to provide comments or input your questions throughout the session in the so-called Slido module. Now, please note that if you're watching the session in full screen modus, you might have to exit full screen in order to use the Slido module. If you find that this is a very interesting session in terms of content and you want to learn more, please note that we have a resource library on the event platform, where also a lot of our speakers with us today have actually made suggestions for additional content. So this can be videos, reports, podcasts maybe even, so please do make sure to check that out. We of course also very much welcome active publication of your participation here today. So if you're on social media, feel free to use the hashtag PAX PoC 2021 or tag us at PAX PoC, or maybe even tag some of the speakers and institutions that are with us today. And finally, importantly, if you're running into any technical difficulties as a remote participant, please note that on the homepage of the platform, in the drop-down menu, you can find a live help desk where people may assist you with any problems that you have. Now, on this session, which is of course part of our overarching theme of accountability, we will again be discussing the June 2015 bombing of Hawija's industrial district in Iraq. This was a strike that was carried out by the Dutch ministry as part of the international coalition against ISIS. It took place in 2015 when Hawija was still very much under occupation of ISIS. It was one of the last cities to be liberated in 2017. But the remarkable issue is that Dutch involvement in the strike only became public knowledge late 2019. We're a few years further, but I think for those who also were participants in the previous session on Hawija, which featured the mayor of Hawija, as well as the executive director of NGO Al-Ghad, I think we very much heard that even now, 6.5 years after the strike, there is still very little actual accountability. This is what we'll be discussing today. So we're going to look at the Dutch role in this airstrike, particularly when it comes to follow-up. But I also really want to provide or use sort of the experience and expertise that is here in the room with us today to get this clear picture both of the direct impact of the strike, but also how that particular strike continues to reverberate and continues to affect people's lives to this day. With me here to do so are, first of all, Mr. Mohammed Abdulkareem, sitting next to me, and he came all the way from Iraq to be here with us, so we're very thankful for that. Mohammed is the head of programs at the Al-Ghad League for Women and Child Care. He has experience working for several international NGOs, and he currently works on many humanitarian issues related to protection, child protection, shelter, displacement, as well as peace building. Also with us is Dr. Lauren Gould, assistant professor at Utrecht University and also the director of the university's Intimacies of Remote Warfare program. This is an evidence-based research initiative that seeks to not only inform academic debate on remote wars and their impact on civilian lives, but also public and policy debate. So thank you for being here. And finally, it is my great pleasure to announce Ms. Saba Azeem, my own colleague and project lead with the PAX Human Security Survey project in Iraq. Before coming to PAX, Saba was already a very experienced peace builder and expert on all kinds of humanitarian issues, and she has field experience in numerous countries and conflict settings, including Afghanistan, Syria, but also Iraq. Now, what all these three speakers have in common, and it's probably good to stress, is that they have been part of a joint research project where they are studying the direct and reverberating impact of the airstrike on civilian lives. To do this, they have conducted field research, have interviewed over 100 victims of the airstrike, as well as doing many key informed interviews. We will learn more about that later in this session, but I just want to note that the fruits of this research, the report, will be published somewhere early next year. So to finally dive into the session content, Saba, actually my first question to you. You were also part of the previous panel, for those who may not have watched it, where you spoke with the mayor of Hawija and Mr. Tufan, executive director of Al-Ghad. Could you just give us some impression of why you felt it was very important to have those people present at that particular session, but also what your key takeaway of that session was?
Thank you very much, Erin. I think it's very important to give civilians the voice because ultimately it is their story, it is their suffering. Fine, we've done the research, but it is still very much their thing. I think it's far more important that they share their stories directly with the public here. I think that makes the biggest impact. Of course, Mr. Subhan is the representative of the people. He was elected time and yet again. He's been representing the citizens of Hawija for over 20 years. So who better to come and share that than Mr. Subhan himself? As well, Mr. Tufan was one of the first persons within the civil society to also tackle this issue and do research and get that momentum, get that attention that this incident deserved. So of course, they needed to be here to actually share what happened because our knowledge can nowhere come near theirs. The key takeaways, of course, is the amount of human suffering. I think we cannot put it into words. 70 civilians that we are continuously getting in the media is just the tip of the iceberg. And even that 70 is very contested because this was under ISIS occupation, so there are no records. So how did they come up with the 70 is also quite questionable. How the suffering continued, as one civilian said, if we stayed inside, we were bombed by the coalition. If we went outside, we were killed by ISIS. So the civilians were really, stuck between a hard place and a rock. What we've also learned, unfortunately, that while there has been recognition 4.5 years later after the incident, there has been zero apologies. The civilians have not been consulted in a meaningful way. Their needs are not being addressed despite so much funding going to Iraq. The people of Hawija, the industrial neighborhood where this happened, the suffering is let's say, it's snowballing. It's becoming exponential because it's so complex now. That's just a very brief summary.
Yeah, and it was also a very intense session to participate, and I think that's right in the key takeaways. And we will get into more depth about what were the specifics of this direct, but also these reverberating impacts later on in this session. I think first, Lauren, a question to you, because we keep saying remote warfare, remote interventions. Could you, as a sort of remote warfare specialist more generally, beyond Hawija, maybe explain to the audience in 1 or 2 sentences, first of all, what we mean when we say remote warfare, but also very much why then you were interested in researching this particular event.
Yeah. Well, first I want to say I'm so honored to be here today with these two guests who have such detailed knowledge of the local context in Hawija. And I think what's really important to express is this is a case, and one case that we hear now today, you're unraveling. But unfortunately, this isn't the only case of civilian harm in the aftermath of remote interventions. We've recently were informed that a similar case happened in Baghuz in Syria, where 80 civilian were killed and also not acknowledged or accounted for by the US in that case. So these kind of cases are indeed what we study at Utrecht University in the Intimacies of Remote Warfare program that I co-founded with Professor Jolle Demmers. We see this shift to remoteness in how advanced militaries, and specifically Western advanced militaries, intervene against perceived security threats, in this case IS, and in context of civil war. And this is characterized by a shift away from boots on the ground and instead airstrikes, sometimes drone strikes or F-16s or F-35s in the near future, are used to attack. And we partner up with local forces, sometimes state forces, sometimes non-state forces, to really do the fighting and dying on the battlefield. And in this context, we see very few military casualties, so no returning body bags on our side. We also see that these interventions are legitimized very much in terms of their precision and the utmost care for civilians in these contexts, saying, zero civilian casualties are our utmost priority. But in reality, remote bombardments, especially in urban centers, lead to a huge amount of destruction and many civilian casualties. But as in the case as in Hawija, but also many other cases, these civilian casualties are not acknowledged by the same ministries that are promoting these wars in terms of precision and care for civilians. Netherlands is a case, but France has not acknowledged any civilian casualties in this operation against IS, which is very much characterized by being a remote intervention. The UK has acknowledged one, the US acknowledges about 10% of what monitoring agency have produced knowledge on. So again, this legitimization isn't a representation of the reality, and we see a lot of denial, secrecy, and even claiming that once bombardments have happened and civilians are killed, that actually we can, that no knowledge can be produced on whether these people that were killed were civilians or, in this case, IS members. And this is what happened in the Netherlands. So first, we saw the Minister of Defense denying the civilian casualties in Hawija shortly after she was already informed about the mass destruction that took place. Her successor kept them secret from Parliament, and then when this indeed the NOS and NRC brought to light that the Netherlands was responsible for this attack, the claim was made, we can't know how many civilians were killed, and when then they couldn't deny that, they said, well, we don't know the identity of those who were killed. We don't know if they're IS members or civilians. And this was really, we were already in a close collaboration with PAX following these political debates in the Netherlands, is where Utrecht University and the Intimacies Remote Warfare program said we need to team up. We need to prove that actually this knowledge can be created and that civilian harm can be, information can be collected, and we can understand both direct and reverberating effects. And what better partners, both PAX, who have a long history in defining civilian harm and studying it, and with Al-Ghad, the local organization. Without you, we wouldn't have been able to do any of this. You have the complete expertise of the local context, access, the trust of the local population. And this was, where this kind of project started. And for us, it was very important to not only investigate the material impact, but also how this harm is is interpreted, what meaning is given, who is seen as the victim, who is seen as the perpetrator, and what kind of acknowledgement and claims about how to rectify this particular situation live amongst the local population.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. And I think that's immediately also a very interesting point that you raised about this research. Because we tend to discuss civilian harm. Well, I think we've already criticized the fact that we often limit that view to civilian deaths and injuries only. But even beyond that, even looking at reverberating impact, we often discuss the very material impact. But of course, there are going to be stories that people tell about what happened to them, and that's going to have consequences as well. And I'm sure we will get back to that later on in this session as well. Now, Mohammed, thanks again for being here and traveling all the way from Iraq to be here with us. I'd like to get in a bit more about sort of how this research was conducted. And you, as head of programs, you very much coordinated the whole research on the ground in Hawija. And in that role, I think it's also important for people to know that you were actually in touch every day with the people interviewing the victims. And you also spoke to many of the victims of the Dutch airstrike yourself, which I'm sure must have been a difficult experience as well. What I would like to ask you is, just as sort of scene setting, I think in 2020, all of a sudden you are being approached by these two Dutch organizations, PAX, as well as the Utrecht University, and are asking you to contribute to this research project about a strike that their country perpetrated on Hawija. What was your initial reaction to that request?
Okay, at the beginning, I would like to thank the audience through online and in person for coming today and to hear about the suffering of the people that after 6 years it's happened to Hawija people. Also, I would like to thank PAX for prepare all this conference and invitation us to Netherlands to transfer the right and the knowledge and the suffering of people here to Netherlands. Regarding this point, as you know, we are a local NGO. And when the PAX start, we have a coordination, and at the beginning with PAX, we are working in a humanitarian sector. We don't thinking about who is responsible to this incident because we are working like a humanitarian organization, and we at least need any person or any humanitarian sector or international organization who can do any things for these people. Therefore, when PAX came to us and start the negotiation and discussion with them about we was so appreciated of that there is some people from Netherlands, like humanitarian actors, come to see what's happened, to make the world see what's the mistake that happened by the Dutch government.
Yeah.
We are so cooperated with the PAX and we facilitate their access to Hawija to see what's in the ground. And because the people trust of Al-Ghad, because Al-Ghad working in Hawija since 10 years ago, they trust of Al-Ghad also, when I will explain more in the coming question.
Yeah, thank you, Mohammed. I think maybe as a first question, before looking at this research project, I mean, you were already in the area, you were already involved in a lot of humanitarian work. To what extent was Al-Ghad already dealing with the impact of the Dutch bombing before PAX and Utrecht University came along?
After liberation of Hawija, as Al-Ghad, as our humanitarian response to this issue, this event that happened in 2015, we using our internal capacity and expertise that we have it from our staff. We are start to doing like a research and do assessment for the area. What is the damage? What is for the damage that happened to people and also for the infrastructure there? We started to collect a small database for these victims who are affected, to us at least prepare anything to try start the advocacy and conduct a campaign for raise their issues, their suffering to the people. Therefore, before coming back to Al-Ghad, we are start our internal research. I know it's maybe a small tools that we are using like a local NGO, but at least we we are so proud that we do something from our internal capacity.
Yeah. Yeah, which I think also creates a lot of legitimacy for your organization in doing this kind of work. Now, we already discussed how that request was coming from Dutch organizations to you, and you said as a humanitarian actor, I don't actually mind who comes with the request. But I can imagine that if you are doing a research where you're actually interviewing people that have suffered greatly because of an attack, that becomes a difficult question. They might not be as neutral about Dutch people coming to research the harm. They're being asked to do interviews where they have to relive all the traumatic events as they happen to them. How did people respond to this request of being interviewed, and why did they participate, do you think?
Okay. At the beginning, when we are start the research, and the people at the beginning have some attention when they are hearing, maybe because this is people from the Dutch, and the Dutch causes this event. At the beginning, start to be afraid of what will be happen, but when they are seeing it's Al-Ghad working with them, because as I mentioned, the people in Hawija are trust of Al-Ghad, because we are working in Al-Ghad more than 10 years ago, and we are trust of the programs that we are implementing.
Yep.
Therefore, when at the beginning when we start our research and face like this challenge at the beginning, we start to conduct a campaign and make the people to know what's the PAX. It's a humanitarian, because as you know, the people sometimes don't know organize between what is the humanitarian sector also. Therefore, we at the beginning start to conduct a campaign in Hawija to show the people what's the PAX and what they are doing and what they mission for the and their objective that for them to transfer their suffering from Hawija to Netherlands for the representative people in Netherlands. After that, the people start to welcome us, and the people start to call us day after day to register their name in the database that we are working, because all of people, when we are hearing and clarify to them what is the reality of this mission that they are doing, they start to welcome of our researcher that they are go day by day to conduct interview more than 2 or 3 hours for people to with the tools and the assessment tool that provided to us by PAX. They start to more participating in the interview, because they are start to trust of PAX that they will transfer their knowledge to the Dutch government. And at least when they are hearing that there is a conference and there is a representative of the mayor of Hawija will come, and also Al-Ghad will go to the conference, they will be so glad and start hoping that there is maybe anything for them in the future. And currently, they are still calling us and want to conduct a research to interview them, because as you know, when you have any incident, you want anyone to listen to you.
Yep.
Because you be relaxed, because sometimes you need to talk anyone about your suffering.
Yep.
But you cannot tell anyone about your suffering, only the person that you are trust. Therefore, because the people currently in Hawija are so trust of Al-Ghad and PAX.
Great, thank you, Mohammed. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you were also involved in actually hearing about the interviews, speaking to civilians who were affected yourself. Already getting a bit to the content, like what incident or what story has really stuck with you? What has made a lot of impression?
We have, according to the interviews that we did, more than till now more than 190 interviews that we conducted. We have a lot of stories with a different suffering, but I would like to mention for 2 stories to invest our time. For example, there is a person who named Abdullah Rashid. He is based near of the explosive device factory, which attacked by the Dutch government. he will have a family more than 10 members from his wife and his children. At that night when the accident they happened, he lost more than 7% of his family.
That's unimaginable. I imagine, Mohammed, maybe also for you to, to just think about it. Saba, maybe a question to you. In the Netherlands, we've been hearing a lot of doubts and concerns have been raised about, the impossibility maybe of doing this kind of research. We're talking about an event that took place in 2015. It came to public knowledge in 2019. And since then, we have heard people say, you cannot research the impact of a strike so many years later. Having been a part of this research together with Mohammed, how would you reflect on that notion?
I think that's a rather ridiculous claim, to put it extremely bluntly. If you've been impacted the way you have, and as Mohammed was describing, you don't forget. You can't forget. Each and every detail lingers on. And to say that Hawija is dangerous, it is impossible to go there, I'm sorry, it isn't. I was there less than 2 weeks ago, and the way we're welcomed in Hawija and the way people have trusted us, I think is, I cannot express my gratitude in words. The gentleman that Mohammed was talking about, who's lost 7 members of his family, he brought those pictures to us and shared them and said, his youngest boy was less than 2 years old. And he said, do they look like terrorists to you? And no matter how much you talk to them, how much you compensate them, there is no compensation. How can you bring back your family? Another gentleman we met who was also visibly shook, he tried to commit suicide twice and was saved by his family because he saw too much, he lost too much. And when I asked him, okay, all of this has happened, what do you want? And his response was death. 70, the number 70 is just the tip of the iceberg. And I'm not Iraqi, I'm not directly impacted by it. He's from Kirkuk. I can't be very rational at the moment.
No, thank you. And just in general, I want to say that I feel this pain. It's a very emotional topic, clearly. I'm just very happy that we're here to show a bit of that pain, perhaps. Now, what I would like to do for the next part, if everyone is still up for it, is maybe to also see, because I think also for an audience, and also if I'm thinking of a Dutch audience, if I'm thinking of my friends, my family, I think it's difficult, even hearing these stories, to realize how one bomb could lead to all this kind of impact. So I would like to challenge us as a panel to maybe see if we can create that bit of a timeline, to really discuss what happened in that moment, what the immediate impact was, but then also how it developed over time. Apologies while we do some logistics here. I think. Here you go, Mohammed. So I want to challenge us to first look very much at the direct impact and then see how harm has developed over time and how one bombing has maybe affected other infrastructure and how that eventually affects a larger group of people. First, I would like our technical team to launch a video and as an explanation to the audience here and online, what we're going to see in this video is footage. It's not great footage. It's probably taken from a cell phone of someone who very shortly after the bombing of the industrial district sort of took pictures of what the industrial district then looked like after the bombing. So I am unsure, are we already seeing the video in the audience? Video 1? Yes, there we go. So there's no sound with this video, but I think we should all just take a moment to really look at this footage and really look at the destruction, even though it was maybe a mistake and unintended, what it actually caused. I will also continue the interview. Mohammed, do you feel
Yep.
ready to continue? Because
I would like also to mention about the story that I have.
Yep.
The first one about the guy who lost 7 families of his member, because he described when he took his daughter and in the road to Mosul because there is no hospital in Hawija. It was controlled by ISIS, and they don't provide health services for the people, for the normal people.
Yep.
Therefore, who took his daughter to the Nainawa because there is a hospital, and in the same road they informed him that his another daughter, another brother, another son, in another car in the same road, and his daughter asked his father. His daughter is his body is divided to two parts, and she want to die, but she asked his father can you do anything for me to let me die because I still suffering. In the same time, she asked his father Abdullah Rashid about that. What about the situation of his brother, her brother?
Yep.
Yeah, because in the same time, and then the second car, his brother is died also.
Yeah.
Also another things, because we are day after day, we have a lot of stories that when we interview the people and see what about their suffering about, and after 6 years they are still suffering, and some people in 2020 died because of the cancer, which caused by the contaminated area of the industrial area, because there is no actors doing there. Also for the person, there is a person named Atiya. He tried more than third times to commit it to suicide, because the first time fire himself, the second time go to the car to damage him, because he is still suffering and there is no any solution for them.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you, Mohammed. Now to stay with you, I think what I would like to ask you very much is, apart from these stories, what could you tell? I mean, this bombing took place on 3 June 2015 in the very early hours. What could you tell us about very direct impact of the bombing, the immediate effects?
Yeah, when the incident happened, there is it is a different of effect. There is a long-term effect and short-term effect. At that time, when that happened, there is more than 70 people are killed, and there is more than 500 people are injured or loses their hands, their eyes. Some people at that night, because the high voice of the attack, they have like a trauma because of this incident. It's a huge incident. When you see at that night, according to the interview that and the feedback that we collected from the people there, they at that night there is, and in that period the water network is destroyed, the schools building are destroyed and damaged. Also more than a lot of building of houses, shelters are damaged and destroyed. Also there is the people there lost their shops, market. There also many of car show. It's also many cars is destroyed. Many people destroy their jobs, their livelihood. Also some people till now disappear. There is people till now, anyone don't know where is they die or what happened, because till now there is a lot of deprice and there is no actor to come to maybe looking to disappear people till now. This is a huge effect, And this is there is also I would like to mention, this is, as mentioned, this is only the short-term effect. Also regarding the long-term effect, after 6 years, when we visit, before our coming to Netherlands, we go to the people in the industrial area and the neighborhood who affected, and meet the people and see what's happened after this 6 years. There is no health service provided to people, because many people currently have health issues like a cancer, but they don't have any incomes to travel to another city to treat themselves. Also, the education, most of schools are still damaged. There is no any actors to come to rehabilitate this. Also, some people currently go to schools away, and also many of people lost their income and their livelihoods, and most of them start to leaving Hawija because they see after 6 years there is no any action from any actors, like a humanitarian side or the Dutch government, and there is no any promise from anyone. Also, the one point I would like to mention, it's a so important point, because the people in Hawija currently are thinking that because they don't organize between the Dutch government and the people of Dutch, because they are, when I meet with them, they are saying that we agree that the Dutch government cannot do anything, but in the same time we don't see a people from Netherlands to start raising this issue against this incident with this government, for like on the social media start for advocate about issue. They are thinking that the Dutch people are agreed what happened.
Yeah.
We try to explain that the Dutch people don't agree, but they say to us, we don't see anything from the Dutch people, only PAX as a humanitarian sector, but we didn't see from the Dutch people to disagree this happen. Also, the people, I would like to mention a great point. Currently, most of the people who lost their fathers or the head of their families who was coming the money for them to live, currently they left their schools and start to working like a child labor. Their colleagues currently going to the school, but in another side, these people are currently don't go to the school and go to the work. The people start to have a hating in themselves. Why this happened to us? Who is the reason? We afraid to create a new generation.
Yep.
To maybe be in the future like the ISIS, because the suffering that currently that they are suffering. It's maybe the adolescent maybe can more understanding, but the child, when he is maybe 10 years old and work to bring money or income for his family, but he still he start to thinking his colleague currently are playing or go to the school, but in the same time in the morning he going to the market to work. He start to think, who is the reason? We afraid from this point. We open the center, as Mr. Tofan mentioned, that we try as much as possible to mitigate what happened maybe in the future. Because if we negligate this issue will be effect maybe on the Iraqi people, maybe all of the people.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mohammed. And I think the point that you stress about people in Hawija not feeling heard and not feeling seen, I think, by Dutch people or even the international community. Let's also not forget it was an international coalition against ISIS. I think it's a striking point, and it's I think also why we as PAX are very grateful that you are here, the mayor is here, and your colleagues from Al-Ghad, because I think it's important that we hear this story from you.
Thanks.
Now maybe Saba, it's gonna sound maybe not the most interesting, but I think a lot of negative civilian impact also results from just damage to electricity, to water, to roads. Could you maybe tell us a bit about how the bombing led to damage that had other effects, and how those things are still continuing to affect people to this day?
For instance, of course, over 1,200 businesses and shops they're flat to the ground. So there's no income, there's no economy. The agricultural sector, Hawija is known for its to be the breadbasket of Iraq. So not only were they producing a lot of agricultural, like especially wheat, cotton, barley, corn, there was also a research center with the agricultural department, and they had about 520 dunams of land, and a dunam is an Ottoman measurement, and in the Iraqi context, 1 dunam is 2,500 square meters. So this was for their research, and they were producing about 1.2 million saplings of various agricultural sort of plants, which was then being shared with the rest of the country. And now the production is down to 200,000. So the impact is not only to Hawija itself, it is also to the rest of the country. Now that just that center alone, they have lost 400 staff members. They lost their employment. That means not enough research is being done. That means not enough food is being produced. The industrial district, yes, very much dedicated to like 20 car showrooms and everything to do with cars, car repairs, car mechanics, electric sort of stuff, paintings. But also they would repair this agricultural machinery. Now this machinery has to go to either Kirkuk or further. So that also increases the time, the cost. So that means, again, the products are getting more expensive. And this is just one example of the agricultural sector. Electricity not being there, that means they cannot get water on a regular basis because, of course, the agricultural sector also depends on irrigation. So this just one thing compounding and compounding and compounding. It's just horrible. If you look at the Hawija General Hospital now, it has no surgical wing. It has no medicines for chronic diseases, which are relatively simpler, so to speak, like diabetes or blood pressure. So people now have to travel 70 kilometers to Hawija, which is, again, at least 1.5 hour drive, depending on which road you take, between 7 and 10 checkpoints you need to pass through. This and of course, pay for that transportation. This is not easy. Not being able to go to school, as Mohammed has said. We talked to the education department. In some schools, the teacher-student ratio is 370 students to 1 teacher.
Yeah, obviously the impact is immense and goes, I think, well beyond the limits of Hawija city even. What I would like to do now, because we keep stressing that we want to hear from local voices, from those affected directly. We, of course, have representatives, and very good representatives here in the room. But I would like to ask our technical team to again launch a video. But before they do, maybe just a quick introduction. What we're going to see here is part of an interview conducted with a woman who lived through the strike. She will describe what has happened to her, but also what she saw at the hospital. I do want to provide a bit of a content warning that even though the images may not be shocking, what she says definitely is. So if you're not up for that, feel free to log on in 2 minutes again. So if I could just ask our technical team for video 2, please.
We are Al-Ghad Lake. Today we are in the center of Hawija district, 75 kilometers west of Kirkuk government, with a population of about 4,050 people. This district, this place, Hawija, is about bordered with Mosul from the north and Tikrit from the south. This gave the strategic importance where it is the traffic gate between these government and Kirkuk. The city sustained a significant damage during the presence of ISIS, and about 75% of the population became internally displaced persons, IDPs and refugees. Most of its residents
يعني مثل ما تشوف يعني هذه هالمنطقة شلون متضررة. ويعني هسه قلنا قبل هالمحلات هسه قلنا نشتغل يم الناس في سبيل نعيش عوايلنا. يعني وقت الطيران التحالف من قصفنا. يعني ورا فترة تضحى الطيران الهولندي ورا ما نزحنا يعني بعد 11 ما بقى هنا أحد تشوف هذا القصف الدمار يعني أغلبية من نزحت يعني قليل ظلت بقت ناس شوف هاي الضربات، هاي الضربة الهولندية من ضربة أذت هاي الناس، لا خلت محل، لا خلت معمل، لا خلت مطحنة، لا خلت شارع، يعني حالتنا يرثى لها. يا رغم هسه ظروفنا هسه جاي نشتغل عمولة من سبب هاي الضربة، زين، وراحت ناس شهداء وراحت ناس قتلى وبيوتنا. انا المقربين لي هسه موجود من قوة الضربة والانفجار انقتل بشارع اطباء موجود حي يرزق، هذا اخوه موجود، والشهداء واطفال وعوائل، وتهجرنا حالتنا يرثى لها. تقول بذاك الوقت ورغم الجرحى كانت بالمستشفى يتعالجون فقط بس الدواش واحنا نخلوهم على صفحه، اكو حتى لا اكو عمليات. هسه اكو ولد انا ما اعرف ولد صاحبي اسمع لاوي صدق بالله ضربه ببطنه لحد ما جاي يعالج.
On 2015, when Dutch airstrikes attacked this area, the center of this area, there were weapon cells under this place that have been attacked to a huge explosion, and nearly 70 people lost their lives, which was between women and men, and even children lost their lives. So airstrikes, which tracks civilian death in Iraq and Syria, conducted that at least 17 civilians, including at least 26 children and 22 women, as well as a large number of militias. Only a place of industrial area. There were people and civilians housed around this place, as we can see. All the houses have been destroyed, and people, as we heard from them, they said that they lost their house, they lost their job, they even lost their shops that they made it to store their stuffs there. We can see that all the things here are destroyed, and people here, as we talked to them, they said that they are living a very bad life due to these explosions that affected their lives. Some of the people here talked to us, to Al-Ghad, they told us that he lost his family, he lost his mother, and he carried their bodies on his hands, which was, he said it in a very emotional way. And I would like to show you an example of the houses that has been destroyed, which is this house just behind me. This house was one of the houses that was here in the industrial area. The house destroyed, and until now no one knows who were the people who were living there, because they were from Mosul and they were IDPs. Even their families in Mosul, they think that their families think that ISIS killed them, and here no one knows them, and they are still under this roof, destroyed on the top of them. No one knows them, no one knows where their body, no one knows how many people were living here. So you can see here there are still signs of the house that is left behind, but you can see no sign of living.
والقصف يعني كان قصف كلش يعني ماكو شديد على هاي المدينة. ماتت ناس، ما بقيت أي شيء، يعني أي شيء ما بقى، لا بشر بقى، لا أموال، كل شيء تحطمت، وتأثرنا تأثير كلش كبير. يعني ما بقى عندنا اقتصاد، الحالة الاقتصادية كلش سيئة جدا. نتمنى يعني مناشدة من منظمات المجتمع المدني، من أي مناشدة لمنظمات المجتمع المدني، للحكومة، لأي واحد معني بهذا الخصوص. هي الحالة إنسانية. توفت بهذا الانفجار كان كلش عنيف، كان قصف كلش كثيف. يعني الناس اللي راحت، أطفال ماتت، نساء ماتت، ناس كبار السن ماتت، كلها بسبب هذا الانفجار. هسه اكو ناس معاقين، اكو ناس جرحى موجودة بالبيوت، اللي تقطعت رجلهم، اللي تقطعت ايديهم، ما بقى اي شيء يعني.
Another example of the houses that I would like to show you is this house that we can see in front of us. This used to be a house of a family where they were gathering and living here. This is one of the houses that I would like to show you. This used to be a house of a family where they were gathering and living together, and they enjoying their times together because they thought that they are safe from ISIS. They left their houses from Mosul. Most of them were IDPs from Tikrit and Mosul. They left their house to find a peaceful area to stay in and to live in. So they found this house to stay in. But unfortunately, as we see and as we hear from people, they were just died here. So many of them are died, and many of them are still disabled. Even they lost their legs or they lost their hands, and they are living their life as a disabled person with a traumatic experience of the explosion. in the houses we still can see the sign of living that people used to live here. We see that, for example, in this house there are still dishes that is left behind, and there are still drugs and medicine that people here took while they were living here, and they felt that this is their house. And we can see also so many things like brush of the females of the house, and we see that there are still toys and stuffs left behind. And this is the tragic trauma for people who are living there. They say that every time when we came here we see this, we feel so sorry for our people that suffered that much. And we can see there are so many things left behind under the roof of the house and the top of the house that is still show us how people were living their life here, and how this house used to be a house of a family who were peacefully living here. But unfortunately, due to the ISIS situations and due to the airstrikes that happened and the ongoing explosions here, they lost their lives, and they lost their hopes for living, and they are not alive anymore. And some of them who are alive are disabled, and they cannot enjoy their life anymore because they are living in a traumatic situation, and they lost their beloved ones.
لنا وللحويجة والناس تضررت، على هاي الناس راحت، على هاي الأملاك، على البيوت، المطاحن، معامل بلوك، دائرة الكهرباء، معمل الزفت، ما خلوا. حتى لو وقعت بها أتذكر بها حتى البلدية، الدفاع المدني موجود عقيد إبراهيم، يعني السيارات موجودة، يعني سووها مجزرة. اي المحلات، الشارع، روحوا شوفوا الناس، اسألوا، قولوا الانفجار اللي سوى بالحوجة.
He says that such a graveyard happened in that night. He says that even the governmental and non-governmental buildings destroyed in that night. Even the electricity building that was near from this area destroyed completely. And the factories were around here, all of them destroyed in the same night.
ونتمنى يعني من المنظمات الإنسانية.
مثلا معاقين أو آتهم مثلا وجههم
اكو عواق موجودين، عواقي موجودين، وناس انطت شهداء راحت، يعني اولا بالبيت يعني تفلش الطفل. انا بنتي اقسمكم بالله العظيم طارت من عندي 3 امتار، وانا ساكن بالاطراف بالحي العسكري. يعني بنتي شنو هاي؟ شيء خيالي. اي ورا شويه صعدت على السطح، يعني انا شفت هاي القنبله بس شفتها بس باليابان بس.
As he says that the explosion was scary in a way that even his daughter in the night ran and shouted, and she was very scared of what was happening. Even as he explained it, he was living around this place, and it was not affected as the people who were living in the center of this industrial area. So he says that they as he said and as he explained it, he only saw such a thing in Japan, not in Iraq and not in anywhere else. He said that this is the first time in his life that he sees something like this.
شنو اللي شفتيه قدام عينك؟ يعني الناس شلون كان وضعها؟ شنو الضرر اللي كان موجود بالمنطقة؟ تقدر تحكينا على ذاك اليوم؟
كنا نايمين يعني الساعة 12 تقريبا، نايمين، ما حسينا هزة أول شيء، بعدين يعني من قوة الانفجار ما عرفنا شنو صار بينا. قعدنا يعني أنا تأذيت نايمة بصف الشباك، وقع علي الشباك، وقع جرح ايدي، اطفالي تأذوا، زوجي، بس اكثر شيء اني يعني تأذيت. من قوة العصف شبابيك وقعت علينا، البوب تقلعت، سيارتي بالحوش راحت، يعني شظايا تأذت، راحت انتهت، البيت يعني تأذى، احنا تأذينا، يعني ما اعرف. طلعنا بدنا نركض برا، رحنا للمستشفى ما عالجونا. هذاك الوقت كان ازدحام، يعني ما اعرف لحد الان نفسي انا كنت حامل بذاك الوقت من العصف والخوف، وقع يعني الطفل، وقع، ولحد الان يعني يعني صار من الخوف ما صار عندي حمل، صار عندي اسقاطات 3 مرات يعني. احنا سمعنا يعني من الحكي المتداول انه التحالف ومنها هولندا بيت خالي نايمين جوا يعني عندهم اطفال بالمهاد يعني بالمهاد تجرحوا وهم بالقمار الدم طالع من عند كذا ورحت للمستشفى ناس مقصقصه رجليها ناس طالع عيونها ناس مصارينها برا ناس ايديها مقطعه ومشوهين وداعش ما يعالجون احد بس يعالجون يعني يقللهم المدنيين يطلعونهم خارج المستشفى.
All right, Lauren, I think you wanted to reflect on what was said before.
Yeah, I just want to reflect on what's happening here, right? So for the people at home as well, what we're doing is Saba's giving us the facts of what's being destroyed, but most importantly, we're seeing the absolute emotion of having lived through this situation and this woman telling her story and reflecting on it back now. And I think that's so important because if we reflect on the knowledge of, we don't see these images in the Netherlands. We're told these walls are precise and that they're caring for civilians. And often many people don't even know we're at war, and we definitely don't know these consequences of war. And this is the true face of military interventions. And this isn't one incident. You know, Mosul was destroyed. For over 70% of Mosul was destroyed through coalition bombardments. Same goes for Raqqa and Syria. These stories that we as a Western public need to watch and feel the emotion of, because we need to realize that these are interventions that are waged in our name with our tax-paying money, and we need to engage in a political debate if this is indeed creating security for both those on the receiving end, but also for us in the long run. And this is something that Mohammed was also referring to, and hopefully we can get back to. But yeah, I think it's so important to not look away. Yeah. And to feel the emotion of what is happening here.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. And what it raises for me is, I think, also the question whether in the Netherlands we were actually even that aware that we were engaged in a war, whereas obviously the consequences for people on the ground were very real. Now, to stay with you, we've heard and seen a lot about the needs that exist, the harm that has been done to people. As an expert on this type of intervention and the resulting civilian harm more generally, could you say something about what we could expect maybe in the future, even several years from now, if we continue not to address these needs?
Yeah. Well, I think actually, you know, Mohammed has already referred to it, and our previous panel also. We talk about in academia the concept of blowback, and actually we've taken that concept from the CIA, who defines blowback as the unintended consequences of the missions that were kept secret from Western publics. And I think this is a very a case that illustrates this secretiveness, but also looking at the unintended consequences. We see, and we've talked at length about the destruction that's taken place, about the futures that are being partially, maybe wholly destroyed for this generation. People give meaning to this. They feel victimized, and I think also very much clearly what's been highlighted. People know the Netherlands was responsible. They do not yet feel acknowledged. There has been no public apology. There has been the committal of 4 million compensation, but this is a very vrijwillig, I can't think of the English word. Voluntary, in terms, in the military you call it ex gratia, or as a gift, as comfort, but not acknowledging that the Netherlands was responsible for this attack and for the consequences of this attack, and no public apology. And I think the combination of very little hopes for the future, combined with this lack of acknowledgement and lack of explanation of what took place here, can sow the seeds for future organizations, rebel insurgency organizations, to play into these insecurities, these grievances, to mobilize people towards violent action again. And this is not only insecurity for the local population, but ultimately also an insecurity for us. So this is how blowback works, in that in the long run we really have to question whether these types of strategies and the lack of acknowledgement for the consequences of this is actually bringing enduring security, which is what Operation Inherent Resolve claimed it was doing. So I think it's very important to reflect on those dynamics, conflict dynamics, and how this sows the seeds for future violence, possibly, hopefully not. There's time to acknowledge. That's what people from the interviews clearly say.
Yeah.
Actually, just to also add in, I think in the previous session, the Mayor, Mr. Subhan, very accurately said it's about the civilian, it's about that human.
Yeah.
So also to just put numbers and figures is just meaningful, because you're dehumanizing everything, and you possibly can't.
Yeah. I think I'm actually already going to turn to one question that we have from our remote audience, because it ties really well into this. The question is for you, Mohammed, and it asks us, what do the victims or their families most often seek in response to this event, so the bombing being exposed? Is it acknowledgement, reparation, prosecution even maybe? Could you tell us what you've heard from people?
What do the victims of the family most often seek the response, and even what do the victims of their families most often seek? Regarding this question, the people need currently at least to any people who are coming to them and interview them and support them, like psychological issues, like to support, because they need anything at least to make them to decrease their suffering. But in another thing, they will need it to any humanitarian action or from the Dutch government to come to them, and at least because they informed us there is no, from 6 years ago, there is no any person from the Dutch government come and visited us, because they mentioned that the Dutch government is support and have from their commitment to support the development and restabilization the area that the conflict happened in it. But they mentioned we didn't see anything. I think it's that the people needed at least to restore their livelihoods, their shelter, to support them, for the people especially who suffering from the health issues, mental health, to maybe support them with the health services. This is to be a small, maybe it's a small initiatives for these people.
Yeah. Thank you, Mohammed.
In a meeting that Mohammed and I were together in, and this is from the 17th of November, so fairly recent. Apart from all the humanitarian needs Mohammed has described, they wanted a formal apology from the Dutch. And by the Dutch, they meant three entities: the current Dutch government, the then Minister of Defense, as well as the pilot who did the air attack. They also want the seriousness, like the Dutch government, they want them to be serious in the work that they're doing, which means that the work needs to be real, the work needs to be transparent, there needs to be accountability.
Yep.
And it needs to be in accordance with the needs of the civilians, what they have asked for. The speed of that response, as well as they also want individual compensation. And when we asked them, why are you going for individual compensation, why not through NGOs or the UN agencies or the Iraqi government? And they said, listen, when we've been at war for as long as Iraq has, there's complete chaos. There is no actor you can trust. So which is why the only way, and as Mr. Tufan also said, it's like you've been given a big block of ice, but what we get is a single drop. The trickle-down effect is so minimal. The only hope is individual compensation. And as Mohammed was also sharing these stories,
yep,
you can't pay a price. You can't compensate for that.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that? I think that's also what came out of the interviews very much, is that's why they support the court case that Lisbeth Zegveld, who's here and posed a question to, is engaging in, and because because they want that acknowledgement and they want the individual compensation, and they feel that the only way to get that is going to the courts. I think it could have probably been prevented if they had gotten this acknowledgement and compensation beforehand. Another thing I forgot to mention before, but I really want to acknowledge, we had a group of students working, collaborating on this project, and also running their own project and doing a social media analysis of the reactions by those who identify with the Hawijian victims. And they did one pattern that really came out much in the social media more than in the interviews, is that people are very aware that who was the Minister of Defence at the time, and who denied any knowledge of civilian harm after she was informed both by the US military command and her pilots about the destruction. This is former Minister Hennes, who's now the UN representative for Unyami in Iraq. And this, for people, it really feels very strange again, and creates a lot of frustration. And again, also because the money that's being funded is the 4 million is also going through UN. So, this distrust for this particular organization, international organization, can really be understood if you also follow the people. That Hennes has really not faced any form of accountability, and is also now UN representative. For local population, it's very hard to comprehend.
And we were asked in our September visit, how can the humanitarian community justify that she is the head of UNAMI?
Now, I think we've already made that bridge from the impact of the strike towards the question of accountability, which is, of course, the question why we're all gathered here today as well. Now, Lauren, we've already, I think, touched upon various things related to Dutch involvement in this strike. But what I would like to ask you, could you tell us a bit more about the commitments that the Dutch have made ever since it became public knowledge, first of all, that they've been involved in a strike, and how they are actually following up on those commitments?
Yes. I won't go into too much detail about the kind of denial and strategic ignorance. I have a report you mentioned on the online library. I think we can look at the most recent commitment. So the 4 million that was dedicated to rebuilding Hawija and the committee Zorgdrager. Both were announced at the end of last year, October and December. And really interestingly, again, many thanks to the wonderful investigative journalists who've really picked up on the Hawija case at the NRC and NOS, brought 2 reports out on these 2 yesterday. Of course, interviewing the mayor about his lack of knowledge of how this money is being spent, and at least lack of consultation in this process. I think, we've discussed this at length in the previous session, but many questions are still left unanswered. It was claimed a year ago that this money would be spent in close consultation with the local population. We, through the research that we've done and the 119 individuals that we've spoken to, but also key stakeholders, no consultation has come up or been experienced by those individuals. But I think with the Commissie Zorgdrager, this is also very interesting. So this was a political committee that was set up as an independent committee to investigate the lead up to the strike and what lessons learned. What lessons we could learn from Hawija, and hopefully also, for this way of war and its impact, and how, we are or not transparent about it. The NRC uncovered yesterday or informed us that this committee is overstretched. Some committee members have already stepped out of the committee. They are not getting access to a lot of information that they require from the Ministry of Defence in the Netherlands and the Department of Defence in the US. They're not allowed to go to Hawija to talk to people themselves, because the Ministry of Defence in the Netherlands says it's too insecure. Saba has already reflected on this point. So they're saying we're having a very hard time, again, generating knowledge on this particular strike and its impact. Now, I sympathise completely with this committee because I think, having worked on this case for so long, this, denying access, keeping things classified, making it very difficult to create knowledge is a pattern that we've seen with the Ministry of Defence for a long time, and also the DoD. However, I would like to encourage this independent committee and say, look, the knowledge that you're looking for is mostly out there. Investigative journalists at the NOS and NSA have done their utmost best through also Freedom of Information Acts to get a lot of information about this strike and the knowledge that the intelligence that was used to inform the strike, that the CIA had already warned that this would have with the possibility of a secondary explosion was very large, that the red card holder actually didn't have very much information. It was just the US has done its research, now please strike, that other countries had denied to carry out this strike, but also on the impact. There are organizations here, but Air Wars is a renowned organization who studies civilian harm and monitors civilian harm. PAX, we have interviewed 119 people. If you keep going to the military, their track record on being transparent about civilian harm is very bad. So as long as we keep asking them, I don't think we're going to get the information that we need. There are other organizations, institutions, universities that have this knowledge, and could write a huge report already based on all that knowledge and what we could learn from this particular strike and its consequences.
So I would like to, bridge on from two things that Lauren has already said. First, I think we need to acknowledge the role that NRC and NOS have played, because it is because of them that this incident came to light. And it took them years to actually bring this out to public. Second, Lauren mentioned the entire thing that the intelligence was provided by the US and the Dutch might not have access to the full intelligence. I asked this question from the civilians there, and I said, okay, if the intelligence was provided by the US and still the Dutch conducted this airstrike, who do you blame? And again, the gentleman who lost 7 members of his family looked at me and he laughed and said, well, the American intelligence was wrong during the Gulf War. The American intelligence was wrong about the presence of weapons of mass destruction in 2003. The American intelligence was wrong now, and still the Dutch are trusting the Americans?
I actually already sort of wanted to pass it to you based on what Lauren just said, because she was referring to a lot of knowledge that's already there. Now you've been to Hawija various times throughout the last year. Could you tell us on your most recent visits, which I think was November actually, what you saw in terms of reconstruction already taking place? And maybe Mohammed could add to that as well.
I think Mohammed and I saw some brand new shiny boards, which were not there when we were there in September. Behind those boards, they refer to a rehabilitation and reconstruction project, yes, in Arabic, and we saw nothing behind those boards. So clearly money's been spent on the boards, we can acknowledge to that. We have spoken to the NGO coordinator who sits with the mayor's office, who basically know which actor is doing what and where and how. He has said that there are a total of 12 NGOs working in Hawija, and their efforts are varies depending on things. However, the 2 Dutch projects that have been announced last December, again, we saw money on the boards. We talked to the electricity department because one of them is supposed to work on electricity restoration, but they're only providing or planning on providing a mobile substation, which means it can be taken away at any time. The electricity to Hawija, the substation still does not mean that Hawija will have the electricity generation capacity, because electricity is still fed through the main line from Kirkuk, which can be cut any time. So how effective is it or is it not is also a question. The electricity department was not consulted about it, although they were asked to supervise this technically. How can they supervise a project that they have no knowledge of is another question, but I'm not a technical expert. The other project We also went around the industrial area again to see if there was even any evidence of it. Nothing. And again, we saw Mr. Subhan, Mr. Tufan, who are the authority all in the cluster system of Hawija, which various national, international NGOs, UN agencies are a part of. They have not heard of these projects. There's some local organizations doing a lot of work. We saw quite a bit of work being done on mine risk awareness and mine risk education in terms of demining nothing. Also, what Mohammed said, there might still be bodies there because ISIS were looking for bodies of their members. Civilians were looking for bodies of their loved ones, and those who were passing by and who were IDPs, nobody knows.
Yeah. So clearly, a very critical note, at least on what we see in terms of reconstruction. So we have about 20 minutes left for Q&A. So what I'd like to do is invite all the participants here in the room to just raise your hand in case you have a question for one of our speakers. And then one of my colleagues will get you to the microphone. I will also be looking towards questions online. However, I first want to bridge it maybe for this part with a final question to you, Mohammed, because you are here in the Netherlands. I think we already heard in the previous session on Hawija how hopeful people are and how many expectations they have and are also communicating to you. Just for you as a person or as a representative of Al-Ghad, when is this trip to the Netherlands a success for you?
I think we need at least some commitment from the Dutch government to do something for these people. We are a local NGO. We cannot cover all of the gaps that there in Hawija because it's a huge damage, and there is multi-damage in multi-sectors like the education, the health, the livelihood, the shelter, the main action. But as according to the response for some organizations that informed that they currently are working in Hawija, but there is no only posters. We didn't want, because it's not my opinion, it's the people say it for us, that we need a real thing on the ground, because not only promise and we'll do this and we'll do this, and there is more than 6 years on the event, and it's a long time. It's not like 1 or 2 years, and currently Hawija is secure, and our colleagues from PAX can access to Hawija and visit and see what happened. I think we need any person to commitment for these people, to at least serve these people before they die. Because as I mentioned, there is 2 cases died in 2020, and there are also some people currently suffering. It's a human response. We at least as our local organization cooperate with PAX, we need at least to advocate and raise this issue to the world, to maybe any people who can support these people.
Thank you, Mohammed, and I think a very clear call towards our government in terms of what is expected, at least from people in Hawija. I'm just checking for a question from the audience. Yes, go ahead.
Erin, if I may break in, I think Mr. Tofan from Al-Ghad has a question or a comment, but most people don't have their translator equipment. So maybe Mohammed, you can go back to being a translator. Sorry about that.
عفوا. السؤالي انه كيف الامم المتحده في العراق هي تهتم بهذه الضربه وضحايا هذه الضربه، ومن يرعى ويدير ملف الامم المتحده في العراق هو نفس الوزير الذي كان هو قد أصدر الأمر بهذه الضربة. واضحة الفكرة؟ وبالتالي وزير الدفاع الهولندي الذي الآن يمثل الجانب الإنساني في العراق هو أساسا لا يقر ولا يعترف بهذه الجريمة.
ترجم؟
هذا جانب. الجانب الثاني، فرنسا، الطيران الفرنسي كذلك قصف الحويجة، ولكن قصف المعهد الفني، اعترف بهذه الضربة ولم تكن هناك ضحايا مدنيين، والآن دا يعمل على إعادة بناء هذا المعهد الفني. شكرا.
Mr. Tofan would like to mention about the 2 points. The first point, that the representative of UN agencies in Iraq, he was before in the incident period, he was the Minister of Defense in Netherlands, and he want to know. He was the responsible for all of this, and the people also blamed this. The Minister of Defense is responsible all of this damage, and how currently he is the representative of UN agencies who advocate and rise for the human rights.
Yep.
This is the first concern. The second one he would like also to mention there is a mistake attack by the French.
The Technical Institute.
Yeah, on the Technical Institute, but the French government, it's agreed that this their responsibilities, but currently they are working to rehabilitate the Technical Institute. He mentioned it is another country also, but currently he is doing the rehabilitate and restore but there is no victims in the Technical Institute, but at least they say that we did this and this is our mistake, and currently they are start to rehabilitate the Technical Institute. Thanks.
Thank you for those contributions. Well, shukran. I'm gonna turn to a question from our remote audience. Lauren, this question says that the New York Times, and I think you already referred to this, recently did some investigative reporting on US bombing of civilians, also as part of the coalition against ISIS, but then in Syria. How can or has the Dutch press played a role in building public awareness for Hawija here?
Yeah, so maybe a little bit more background on the New York Times article. Again, fantastic work of investigative journalists, also teamed up with, among others, Air Wars, who also helped, I think, the NSA and NOS investigative journalists uncover the Dutch responsibility for the attack in Hawija. This was a 2019 attack in Baghuz. Quite a horrific story. A drone pilot was monitoring one of the camps, very aware that there were a lot of children and women in these camps, and then a US F-15 flew over and bombed and killed over more, now is acknowledged, 80 casualties. Actually, there was an in-house lawyer that immediately said this could be a war crime and that this needed to go kind of into the military transparency and accountability machinery, let's call it that. This was ignored. Reports were kind of sanitized. It was, inconvenient questions were pushed aside. Ultimately, one of the whistleblowers was fired. He wasn't a whistleblower at the time, so he was fired. He was trying to keep putting this back on the table. And quite interestingly, documentation now shows what they said at the US DoD or Pentagon was that this wasn't a big media case, so therefore they weren't going to investigate it. So again, this illustrates how important this kind of public awareness and scrutiny is. Ultimately, he was fired, and then he stepped to the New York Times, and they had already been investigating this case for a long time. And with his knowledge and inside information, it was then brought out. Again, in this case, what happened? The US then said there were 4 civilians that were killed out of these 80, and actually the rest they couldn't identify whether they were civilians or IS fighters. A very well-known plea that we know from Hawija as well, because women and children can also pick up arms. So again, this kind of saying we cannot create any knowledge on whether these were civilians is then also reinforcing the non-acknowledgement of these civilians. So a lot of similarities between the Hawija and the Baghuz case. I think what's really important is that, and maybe that's our role also as academics, to show these comparisons. I think this was picked up very briefly in the Dutch media, but actually showing how the comparison and showing that this is systemic. This isn't one-off incidents. Baghuz wasn't a one-off instance. Hawija wasn't a one-off instance. I've made many others. This is a systemic reaction to civilian harm. And I think the media is very good at giving us information, the nitty-gritty of these different cases. But now it's time to show the cross-cases similarity and maybe inform the public a bit more why it's so important that we understand why this denial and secrecy takes place, and how this then affects both the security on the local population, but also ultimately our own insecurity. Yeah.
Thank you, Lauren. Mohammed, another question to you from our remote participants. I think you touched upon this already a bit, but maybe we can come back to it. So this particular strike on the industrial district, how did that influence, maybe even change, people's perception of the international community, but also, of course, the Dutch military at the time?
Yeah. Before the incident and the event, the people were thinking that they need to the international community and the Dutch government to help them and start focusing on the because they know without the air attack they cannot liberate it from under control of ISIS. But after this incident happened, they start to advocate and ask to stop this air attack because they start thinking that there is for example, the international community have all of the technologies and they can identify what the exact target, how they can have a mistake like this. Yeah. After that, the people currently not in Hawija, in all of Iraq, they didn't agreed with the international community to have like this air attack.
I think too also, from what we read in the interviews, a lot of people asked for more boots on the ground because then they would be able to see and distinguish between who the enemy was and who was civilian. We've also heard a lot of testimony saying, we were very happy initially when the coalition was coming and liberating us because finally we would be liberated. But then they bombed us before they liberated us. And then another gentleman said, I was praying to God that they would, the coalition would come and liberate us, and I even fasted for 3 days. But they killed us far more. They damaged us far more than they helped us.
And I think, Saba, to stay with you, and if I could just sort of add a question of my own, this is of course also very much how perceptions have changed of the intervention of the international coalition, but psychologically, what has this bombardment meant for people in how they lived sort of the rest of the war?
I think it was absolutely devastating because we also had a question in the morning that this incident happened 2015, and of course ISIS came 2014, but Hawija was besieged beginning of 2015, and then they were only liberated in 2017. So for about 2.5, almost 3 years, they lived under occupation and against that continuous bombardment. So psychologically, as in, the children are not going to school because they're teaching ISIS curriculum. There are no basic services available. For instance, we've heard that they would have to use tea leaves 3 times because they couldn't afford to make tea this often. They couldn't afford sugar anymore. A bar of soap went up 10 times. They didn't have vegetables, fruits. They forgot what a tomato looked like, what the taste of an onion was. So, just living through that for years, whether you're an adult or a child or anybody for that matter, cannot be easy. And then also, you think finally we're liberated, we're going back home. You come back home, it's destroyed, nothing's there. And it was also liberated 4 years ago, and still there's nothing there. And then they see, millions of dollars, and not millions, billions of dollars being announced every year going into Iraq. What is the trickle-down effect? So again, very early on, somebody once said, we are the parasite of the poor. By we, they said the humanitarians. We're getting money on the names of these people, and the trickle-down effect is so minimal. Of course, the perceptions change. However, in one of the interviews which we had in Hawija back in September, they did say that by now we've lost faith or hope in the Dutch government. We do not trust them, but we do have faith in the Dutch legal system. I hope there's still hope.
Yeah. Thank you, Saba. I see quite an interesting question from Mariana to you, Lauren, which is asking, whether you think that the Netherlands will ever publicly apologize in light of the sort of increased awareness there now is of what happened in Hawija in 2015, but also how that continues to affect people.
Well, let's continue on the idea of hope. I would hope so. I would hope that, the Dutch government and ministry, but also other governments who engage in this type of warfare, realize that acknowledgement is part of bringing enduring peace. That without acknowledgement, this is leading to grievances and possible future threats. So it's in their own best interest to acknowledge what happened and own up for their mistakes. I think also should be said, advanced militaries, especially, they go to war with really very hard expectations, right? So these wars are sold in being precise and always, leading to zero civilian casualties. That is not the reality of war. War is inherently about death and destruction. There is no such thing as a precise war, and there will never be such a thing. And I think, then of course ministries go to war. They kill. That is what war is about. They kill civilians. And then, it's all kept under wraps to keep up this kind of narrative. So I think as a society, we also have to be engage in a much more honest conversation about wars are about killing and they're about destruction. And then based on that discussion, whether we want to support wars, and then give our militaries a much more realistic set of goals if they go to war. But this whole democratic debate, I think, is really missing, and therefore also kind of leads to this, level of denial and secrecy in the aftermath. So let's us as Western democratic citizens have a more honest and caring conversation about.
I'm glad Lauren's talking about hope, but Srebrenica happened 26 years ago. The Dutch still have not apologized.
Yeah, I wanted to get actually back to the point on realism, Lauren, which I think you addressed, because there's also a question, again, in the audience, which maybe is a bit hopeful. Namely, we've seen all this scrutiny, I think now. We know of cases where precision warfare went horribly wrong, wasn't that precise. Have you, sort of in the time that you've been working on this, seen any advances or sort of any changes being made towards making these wars more precise? Like, is there more accuracy these days?
Well, we have a military expert in the room who can tell us from the inside experience. I think when Doshi says our precision means that we hit the target that we wanted to hit, right? Yep. So the slogan I've often heard is, we're as precise as the quality of the intelligence that we receive. And then there's this whole question, okay, who's providing the intelligence? Based on what intelligence? How is that chain of kind of the kill chain build up? And because that is such a closed box, it's very hard for outsiders to say, oh, there's great improvements. Of course, the military will tell us, and the legal advocates within the military will say, no, it's much more precise. I'm seeing a lot of the imprecision in the realities, and we've mentioned a number of them, so I won't go into them again. And I think we should not step into this discourse of precision too much. There is also a lot of precise attacks on infrastructure, because it is thought to undermine the enemy other or the enemy threat elsewhere, right? So precision just means that we attack what we want to attack. There are proportionality principles, but again, then this is, how many civilians are allowed to attack in face of the military importance of this particular target. There's a lot of politics in that that I think we need to be very much aware of.
Yeah. So shifting maybe attention away from the Dutch government and also towards the Iraqi government, I see there's a question to you, Mohammed, that's asking whether those people that we've discussed today, those victims of the airstrike who have lost everything or near to everything, whether they have had any assistance from the Iraqi government or any help with fact-finding.
About the Iraqi government, according to the what we see on the ground, there is no like individual initiatives for these victims who are affected. And also, I think the Iraqi government start to have like some project to rehabilitate the electricity department in Hawija. Also, they start to rehabilitate some roads and some governmental offices. This is the support from the Iraqi government. But for the people, according to what we see on the knowledge and what we have from the update from the governmental authorities, there is nothing.
I think it's also a bit unwise for us to expect much, because the Iraqi government also just came out of a massive war against ISIS. They're overstretched. Most of their budget is going to operational costs, which means they're paying salaries. They do not have enough budget left for this infrastructural development. Yeah. So for a country that's just coming out of war, and to expect them to do that, yes, there should be expectation. I'm not saying there isn't, but I think we're also being slightly unfair in that.
Yeah, thank you, Saba. We're very close towards the end of our session. So what I would like to do before I really close the session is to ask maybe each of you if you have one final comment that you would like to make, whether it's directed towards the international community, towards the Dutch government, maybe a key takeaway from this session. Lauren, could I start with you?
Yes. Maybe I would like to address democratic citizens. We live in democracies. We have the privilege of being able to exert democratic control over the decisions that are made. And I think very important place is to inform ourselves. The information is out there, although it isn't willingly told to us by our militaries. Understand the changing nature of warfare, its consequences, and then try to hold to account, right, through that democratic citizenship. So that would be my advice based on all that we've heard today. Don't look away.
Good. Then I am going to look away because I'm going to address Saba. Saba, do you have any final remarks?
Again, I would say do not dehumanize. I don't know whether I'm taking my designation, current job title too seriously. It is about that human and how is that human feeling secure. It is not only about physical security, but there's also, do they have shelter? Do they have livelihood? What are their perceptions? What is their environment like? Can they go to school? Can they exercise their freedoms? So that security is just not physical. So let's talk about each and everything.
And Mohammed, as the person who has traveled the furthest to be here, I think we're immensely grateful that you're here. Any last words?
I would like to ask from the International Committee, especially for the military operation, to at least include the humanitarian actors during this air attack. Because, for example, if for the Dutch government to bring any from the humanitarian advisor, he will see the long term and the short term of the effect, because as you know, the military operation and the military command only focusing on the targets. Yep. I hope if the international committee to involve the humanitarian actors in the operation, in the military operation. I would like to ask from not even from the Dutch government, also from the international committee and from the any donors who are interested, who can come to visit Hawija and maybe support these families because they are still suffering after 6 years.
Yes.
Thanks.
To add to that remark, which is very important, if you want to get in touch with Al-Ghad, you can of course approach them. You can also send us a message at poc@paxforpeace.nl and we can see if we can bring you in touch in case of any good initiatives. I think that brings me to the end. I really want to thank all of you for what I think was a very honest, a bit of an emotional discussion as well, but I think it's important we had that discussion. I also want to thank our in-person audience for being here, and I know it must have been intense from where you're sitting as well. We're going into a lunch break for those who are here, so we have an hour to grab some lunch. For remote participants, I would very much encourage you to log back in at 2 o'clock, where we're going to discuss more tangible examples of security actors who've actually tried to create accountability structures. Whether those work or not, that is something we will discuss in the next session. If this was a session that you thought was very interesting, please do go to our online resource library, see if you can find more material, see if you can get in touch with us or with any of the speakers, and use the lunch break as an opportunity to maybe network with some of the other participants here at the conference. When you're on the online platform, you can use our networking tool called Matchmaker. You just fill out a couple of questions about yourself, your interests, and then they will provide a match of who you should be talking to. So that was it for us. And thank you, and hopefully see you again at 2 o'clock.